QBR, the lowest by any with multiple playoff starts in the 15-year history of that metric. He struggled particularly in the first 3 quarters of these playoff games, completing less than half his passes. Overall, only 3 MVP quarterbacks have gone one and done in the playoffs in 3 straight years at any times in their career. Joe Montana, Burt Jones, and Y.A. Tittle. Here's Lamar.
It's win to go home right now. I want to win regardless. I don't really care about what people got to say. I only been in the playoffs twice. My young career, other people been in the league forever, haven't been in the playoffs at all, but it is what it is, but definitely trying to erase that narrative right there. That's the number one right now in my mind.
So he's thinking about it, and I get it. I understand why he would be. My unsolicited advice on the radio yesterday was for him to block all of that out and remember that he turns 24 years old today. Peyton Manning won his first playoff game when he was 27, and that all turned out okay. But that said, Damian Woody, how much pressure is on Lamar Jackson Sunday?
Well, listen, clearly he's thinking about it, but listen, I'm bullish on Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. It seems like the Baltimore Ravens have found their groove again. Greg Roman and company, with all the injuries that they've sustained on the offensive side of the football, they finally figured this thing out. And over the last 5 games, they've rushed the ball for more yards than any team in NFL history. So you're talking about going into the tournament with momentum. They found it because there's not a weapon in the National Football League more deadly than Lamar Jackson. I can tell you right now, the Tennessee Titans should be petrified of this rushing attack that the Baltimore Ravens are going to be bringing to the table.
Yeah, what do you think, Nick? You're a former Raven. You sort of live in the general area, so you hear some of maybe the more local noise. What do you think of the pressure on him?
Yeah, I think the pressure is incredibly high, not just because of his 2 playoff losses, but because he is the centerpiece of that offense. I think no team asks more of any one player than the Ravens ask of Lamar Jackson to carry that offense. I think that he will play well, and he'll kind of put to rest the narrative that he's talking about, in part because he's great and that team is really good, but also because the Titans are really bad. And I know Himbo doesn't like people texting me answers to the question, but he texts me answers to the questions all the time. Just like he just texted me that the Titans defense is the 2nd worst by efficiency in the last 15 years. So that's a pretty easy target for Lamar Jackson. And the Ravens to go up against. I'm looking forward to Lamar playing this game on ESPN, and then in the post game, just like in that Monday night game, Lisa Salter is going to interview him. He's going to say some answers and then hit us with a "thank you, Miss Lisa," which is my favorite play Lamar Jackson has had all season.
To remind you, again, he is 24 years old today. Go ahead, Schefter.
Well, you raised an interesting point about the fact that Peyton Manning didn't win his first playoff game until he was 27. And that got me thinking that John Elway didn't win his first playoff game until his 4th or 5th season in his league. But I think when John Elway played, and even when Peyton Manning was starting out, it was a little bit different in terms of the noise that was made. If Lamar Jackson loses this game and goes to 0-3, can you imagine what the offseason chatter and questions will be about his postseason performance? They will be multifaceted. It will go on and on. The conversation about him failing to come through in the postseason will take on a life of its own, whether it's fair or not. That's the world we live in. And so there is a lot of pressure on Lamar Jackson to win this game from that standpoint. And how about from the other standpoint, too? Last offseason, after the playoffs, Patrick Mahomes, 3 years into his career, got a new contract extension. Deshaun Watson, 3 years into his career, before the season began, got a new contract extension. Lamar Jackson is eligible for a new contract for the first time in his NFL career after this season. Do you think it's better to go to the bargaining table at 0-3 in the postseason, or better to go to the bargaining table, as Joe Flacco showed in Baltimore, with an extended postseason run? So there is a lot at stake for Lamar Jackson. He can quiet all the offseason noise and make himself an awful lot of money with a win this weekend. And the further he goes in the playoffs, the better it's going to be for him.
Okay, that part of it I cannot argue with. The financial part of it obviously does make a lot of sense, but I will just continue to remind everyone, he turned 24 years old today. To expect everything in the world from him right now might not be realistic. Meanwhile, let's go to the performance of the night. This week's wood-based pun is who would have thought, in which we just try and find other ways to use the word would creatively and allow Damian Woody to yell at someone. So, D. Wood, who would have thought for today? Who are we angry at this morning?
Well, Greeny, first let me say I got to be a little careful because I threw up my back, so I can't get too animated. But who would have thought the Eagles would have just thrown away the game against the Washington football team by benching Jalen Hurts? And I know everyone wants to talk about, Jalen Hurts was only 7 for 20, he had a touchdown or whatever. But anyone who watched the game, not people who look at stats, but anyone who watched the game could clearly see that the Eagles had an opportunity with Jalen Hurts at quarterback to win that football game. We always talk about in the National Football League, the people in that's affiliated with the National Football League, talk about the integrity of the game, the shield, and everything that comes with playing in the NFL. And in that moment, Doug Peterson decided to take out his young second-round pick, who's been scratching and clawing and fighting to try to win that football game, through throwing a guy, Nate Sudfeld, who hadn't sniffed a play the whole season. I mean, are you kidding me? You're going to go out there and take out a guy who's trying to give you everything he has with limited personnel because all the injuries that's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles, and you're going to throw throwing a guy in the fourth quarter and Nate Sudfeld, who hadn't played at all this year. Doug Peterson, what are you doing? Okay, we heard players in the locker room after the game questioning that decision. And that's the one thing. That's the one easy way that you can lose a locker room in this league, okay, by pulling shenanigans and pulling stunts like that in the game. So for me, I got to shake my head at Doug Peterson, that Philadelphia Eagles organization, because that was a bunch of BS what they pulled in that game against the Washington football team. You had an opportunity to knock out that team so they wouldn't be in the playoffs.
A lot of people agree with you on that, D. Wood, particularly me. And Schefter, if I could come to you there, unless you have something more important, because if you do, by all means, tell us. But otherwise, the reverberations of that thing with Peterson and stuff, it hung around a little bit, right? We heard the conversations on the radio and some of the players continued to talk. Does that settle down now to the best of your understanding, or are there still fences that need to be mended in Philadelphia?
I think there'll be players that'll be disappointed and will remember that for a long time. But again, it's not like they have a game this week. They have months to let this heal, months to let this recover. I don't think the New York Giants will forget it, and I would not be surprised if in week 1 next year, the Giants and Eagles are somehow pitted against each other, and that provides fuel for the Giants all off season long. That would not be a surprise to me. We'll see how that shakes out, but that's something that I think the Eagles players will remember. They'll get past it. They'll get over it. They'll get over it, I think, sooner than perhaps the New York Giants will. It's something that will follow them throughout the course of the offseason, and it's something that Doug Peterson will have to answer to his players in the weeks to come.
Well, maybe the most